welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be looking at section A, looking at the melody, and we're going to be analysing the melody. Let's just recap. In the last two videos we looked at motifs. A motif is a short melodic idea. We made the connection to jigsaw pieces. So when we're creating a jigsaw, we use the different pieces, put them together, and it creates the picture. When we're wanting to create a melody, we use different motifs. We put them together and it creates the melody. The melody is based on two short melodic motifs, and both are very different. So we have motif X and we have motif Y. Just as we can see, both are very different, which is fantastic because when it comes to analysing, we can really talk in a lot of detail on how different they both are. So let's look at motif X. If we were to describe motif X and how the melody is moving, we would first of all say it's descending. It's getting lower in pitch, and we can see that by looking at the notes on the stave. It starts very high in pitch and it goes lower, as we can see going down the stave. So we would already say that this is descending. We would also call this an arpeggio or broken chord melody. Bach is using just three notes. He's using B, D and F. These three notes form a B minor arpeggio or a B minor chord. And of course, because we're playing them separately, this would be called a broken chord or an arpeggio. So just by using B, D, F, using these three notes, he's managed to create a motif which is a descending arpeggio or a descending broken chord. Let's have a listen. Our next motif, which is motif Y, is very different, and we can see that already. If we were to look at the notes, we would be able to see that these are ascending. These are getting higher in pitch. So they're going from quite low on the stave and they're gradually getting higher. We would also describe this melody or this motif as having some arpeggio or broken chord movement. So I've just highlighted two lots of semiquavers that are broken chords or arpeggios. We would also describe it as having some conjunct movement as well. Now, conjunct means notes that move in step. So a melody that moves in step, notes that are next to each other. And we can see that there. We have C, B, C, B. The notes are next to each other, very close, so we would describe this as a conjunct movement. Let's have a listen. So already we can start to see that motif Y is very different to motif X. So let's have a look at the whole score now. We've analysed the two motifs. However, we need to look at the melodic devices, we need to look at how the motifs have been used in the other instruments, and we need to be able to describe that. Let's begin. First and foremost, Bach begins with an anacrusis. An anacrusis is an upbeat. This is a bar that has one beat in it at this moment in time anyway. And that is beat 2. We've got a time signature of 2/4, so we have two crotchet beats in a bar. Here is just one beat. This lasts for one beat, this bar, this upbeat. So beginning with an anacrusis, one of the first melodic devices to be used. As we know, motif X, as we've just described it, motif X would be described as a descending B minor arpeggio or a descending B minor broken chord. And then motif Y, as we've just analysed, motif Y would be described as an ascending motif with some arpeggio and conjunct movement. So arpeggio and conjunct. If you remember to the past video, the first ever video we looked at, the next piece of the jigsaw is motif X in the flute. And again, he's using a descending B minor arpeggio or a descending B minor broken chord. The genius of Bach is he reuses these motifs, but he passes them to other instruments. So now we're going to be looking at the basso continuo. This motif, as you may have realised and hopefully remember, is motif X modified. We call it modified because it does end with a quaver and two semiquavers, whereas motif X has just ended with a crotchet. Now, we would still describe this as a descending motif. However, it is not B minor no more. No. He has changed it, so now it is descending E major 7th arpeggio. We have the notes, these notes form an E major 7 chord. So we have E, G sharp, B and D. So he's used those 4 notes to create his motif. You might remember that he then uses motif X again, or motif X modified, because it does end with 4 semiquavers. However, Bach has used a melodic device, and this melodic device is called a sequence. A sequence is when you repeat a motif at a higher or a lower pitch in the same instrument. Now here we can see he's made this higher. He's copied this motif, motif X, pasted it, made it higher. So we would describe this as a rising sequence. So he's copied bars 6 beat 2 to 8 beat 1 and made it higher in pitch. So this is now called a sequence. Let's have a listen. So as we heard there, this motif was much higher in pitch. We can also see the same in the flute. Now, although this is the main motif we're listening for and looking for, the flute plays a little motif. We're not really going to give this a name because it's not as important, but we can see here the motif it's playing. I've just highlighted another motif, and you might realise that it looks identical but it's higher. Again, this is also called a rising sequence. We're using this motif, copied it, pasted it, made it go higher, so it's exactly the same. We would call this a rising sequence. Let's have a listen. So this is a really important point to note. Although we're looking at the melody, this is now a melodic device that Bach has used, which is a sequence. What is also well known with the Baroque era is using ornamentation to decorate a melody. So Bach has used trills, which we can see in bar 8 beat 1 and bar 10 beat 1. And he's used the trills there, and also in the flute as well, in the violin 1 as well, and the flute. As we might remember, as the jigsaw builds up, the next motif to follow is in the flute, and it is motif Y modified, because it does end with 4 semiquavers, so it's modified. This is still an ascending motif, and it's still using arpeggio and conjunct movements. The next motif is interesting though. We know it as Y1 because he's used motif Y, or he's used aspects of motif Y, but he's developed it, he's extended it, he's started to do different things with it. We would call this motif, if we were to describe it, we would call it an ascending motif, so it's getting higher, and also using rising intervals. So an interval is the distance between 2 notes. So I just want you to look here at the first 2 notes in every group of semiquavers. So we have F and A. Here we have F and B. Then F and C. F and D. It's getting higher in pitch. The distance between the F is getting higher. It used to be an F and A, then F and B, F and C, F and D. It's constantly getting higher in pitch. The intervals are rising. and the distance between them two notes is rising. So Y1 would be ascending and rising in intervals. Now, sometimes you may have heard the phrase contrary to popular belief. This means opposite to what was thought. So contrary means opposite. Now, if we had contrary motion in music, contrary motion means when one part goes higher and one part goes lower. So we have the opposite. One goes higher in pitch, one goes lower in pitch. I'm just going to make you aware of motif Y1 again, which is bar 12, beat 2. If you remember, it's rising in pitch and we have rising intervals. I've just blacked out violin 1, violin 2 and the viola. We don't need to focus on that yet. And I just want to make your attention, or bring your attention to the basso continuo. Now, first of all, let's just look at the flute. Remember me saying it's constantly going higher in pitch. So we have the A, F to A, then F to B, then F to C, and F to D. Then rising intervals, it's getting higher. If we look at the basso continuo on the beat, we may notice that it's getting lower. So we have F, then D, then C, then B. So as one is getting higher, one is getting lower. Now this device, this melodic device that Bach's used, contrary motion, can add lots of excitement, and it's perfect as the section comes to a close. One gets higher in pitch, one gets lower in pitch. So let's have a listen to it all now in context. We now know what all the motifs are, and we can now describe how these motifs move. Let's see all the melodic devices, and let's see all the motifs in motion, and let's see how they're all come together. Thank you so much for joining me in today's video. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you learned how the motifs move and how the melody is formed. I look forward to seeing you in the next video where we're going to be looking at section B. See you soon.